two authors as guests here in the bookshop today. Ryan Yemi, who's written The Quantum Thief, exciting new science fiction story, and MD Lachlan, also known as Mark, who's written this amazing new fantasy story, the first of three,
First of many, with any luck, yeah.
Yeah. The first, anyway. Set in the Viking era. So I'll start to ask you a few questions, and Sanna will ask Hannu a few questions, and then you're all welcome to get your copy signed here by the authors. So, your start in this business, this genre, this world, started out quite as many of us, with role-playing games and fantasy and stuff in your youth.
Yeah, it started a bit before that. I was quite interested in fantasy from a fairly early age, and I started reading books like Alan Garner's Weirdstone of Brisingamen and that. But I was part of the first wave of Dungeons and Dragons players in the UK. I started playing in about 76. I know, I don't look that old, do I? But it was 76. And yeah, and D&D had it was the major thing I did in my youth. Although I'm not sure it impacts particularly on the way that I write. I think it probably does impact on it, but not in a direct way.
You've written a book about it.
Yeah, I wrote a book under my real name, which is Mark Barracliff, called The Elfish Gene, which was called Dungeons, Dragons and Growing Up Strange. And it was about what happens when, at 12 years old, you become utterly obsessed with a role-playing game, and to the point of vitamin D deficiency, and just don't see the sunshine for 5 years and spend it locked in a room with 8 other boys. Which is how I spent my youth.
You had a chance for normalcy, you blew it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that was the line on the book.
Yeah.
Had a chance to be normal and blew it. Yeah.
I think that sells a lot of books.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't manage to get any copies in time for this, but we have this instead. But then, when you continued writing, you wrote mainstream.
Well, I wrote comedy because I've always been interested in comedy, and having gone to an all-boys school and associated all with boys, humour is absolutely the currency. Nobody says anything serious in England ever when they're growing up, and particularly in male culture. And so you just have basically your entire youth is a class in how to write comedy and what's funny, and so it was very easy for me to just write comic novels and comic books, because it's just an extension of the way that I've been speaking really for many years.
And you've written different kind of stuff except comedy books, novels.
Well, I've written memoirs, but they've all been humorous memoirs. But these, I mean, Wolfsangel isn't funny at all. And if you laugh at Wolfsangel, I've done something really wrong. So it's a dark mythic fantasy, because you can become sick of comedy, which I actually you've been laughing so long it begins to ache. Your face begins to ache, and you feel you want to do something else.
So how come you shifted back to your? Well, it's kind of.
Well, yeah, it's an odd thing. I have this. I wouldn't call them. I wouldn't aggrandise them by calling them theories of writing. I have these ideas about writing, where when it works well, it doesn't come from the same place as conscious thought. And I literally just started writing it. I sat down to write an urban comedy and started writing about a Norse Age werewolf. And I was like, well, where's this coming from? Okay, well, it looks okay, I'll keep writing. And by the time I finished it, it sold, so that was great.
How did your publisher react?
Oh, well, it wasn't how my publisher reacted. The way that things tend to work, you have the same agent but many different publishers sometimes. My agent said, this is rubbish, go and write about real people. I don't like this. And then somebody, one of the major publishing houses in England, asked her if she had any fantasy stuff on her books, and she said just this, and sent it off more in hope and expectation. And the guy said, this is the best thing I've read in 20 years, and then left the publishing company, which was great. But yeah, so you'll notice the great thing about anybody who's ever done any writing, agents' opinions go from this is rubbish to this is brilliant in 5 seconds if someone expresses financial interest in it.
The book is set in the Viking era. Have you had any particular interest for Vikings, or how come you chose that?
Well, it just happened really. I used to read a lot about Norse myth when I was a kid, because fantasy I'm quite old, and when I was a kid, fantasy hadn't defined itself as a genre in any way like it had now. There weren't, as far as I knew anyway, fantasy bookshops. There's no fantasy section in the library. So I ended up, because I didn't know these things existed, I ended up reading a lot about myth, because that's what was in the library. And so that, yeah, so I kind of knew this stuff anyway, really, and a lot about magic as well, because I don't know how my mother allowed it, but I used to take out books at 10 years old, like The History of Witchcraft in England, or Practical Psychic Self-Defense by Dion Fortune, and I'd be there reading all these kind of books on Satanism when I was about 10 years old, which I've got no idea how my mother let me, but anyway, she did.
How do you plan this series? This is the first book in the series.
Yeah, well, originally this book started out as, it was set in the Second World War, flashing back to the Viking period, and it was rewritten as a series starting in the Viking period, going all the way through human history to the Second World War. So, yeah, and it's okay because I know a lot about Vikings, and I know a lot about the Renaissance, and I know a lot about the Second World War. A lot in between is kind of hazy, so I'm gonna have to find out about like the medieval period and sort of the Regency period and Victorian period, which I know nothing about. But anyway.
So there's some research before you can.
A lot, yeah.
Continue or well, in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And the theme, I think you haven't had commentaries earlier about how come you have werewolves and Vikings together.
Well, this is a question I get perennially asked, and it's one that always surprises me. If you read the sagas are full of werewolves. You know, there's the saga of Helgi Hundesbani, and I'm probably pronouncing that really badly. I'm aware that I'm in a Norse country, a Nordic country, pronouncing Nordic names awfully. Yeah, it has lycanthropy in it. The guy, but it's a different kind of lycanthropy to what you see in Hollywood movies. It's either a curse or something that the person takes on themselves as an act of sorcery. So they put on a wolf skin and become a werewolf as a deliberate act, or they sometimes accidentally put on an enchanted wolf skin and become a werewolf. So Norse mythology is full of wolves, and it's not full of werewolves, but it has werewolves in it. So it's not at all something that I sort of created. And there's on the other side, there's also, again, I apologise for the pronunciation, the Ulfhedna, which are the berserkers, who are these people who put on animal skins, and they're not true werewolves, but they take on animal characteristics to go into battle. So it is actually quite, it's an easy fit, really.
Yeah. And it's not the kind of werewolf that changes when there's a full moon.
No. One of the things that surprised me when I started researching werewolves is that the werewolf that changes at the full moon happens in about 1950. He's a creation of Hollywood, the werewolf that changes at the full moon. Even in Lon Chaney's 1942 The Wolfman, the wolf does not change at the full moon. He changes when the wolfsbane is in bloom. And so this is going back to an earlier kind of werewolf, and for me a slightly more horrific werewolf, because this guy is just changing one way. He's not going to change back again, and so he's losing his humanity throughout the length of the book, which strikes me as potentially more horrific than someone who just wakes up the next morning naked in a zoo. Although I did like American Werewolf in London.
And as you said, it's not a humorous book.
No, in some ways it's not a very fun book. I think it is quite a dark book, and it's quite I'm trying to say what it is without sounding very pretentious, but I can't, so I'm not going to.
Well, I think it fits very well in the current vein of dark and gritty fantasy, where people actually suffer.
Yeah, well, they do really suffer in this book. It's not gritty in the sense of I don't put a lot of swearing in, but there's. So it's not gritty in the sense. If you read, say, Mary Gentle's Ash, that you'll see there's a lot of swearing. It's almost like someone saying, "Well, this is a fantasy novel, but we're going to make this hyper realistic and hyper gritty realism to sort of balance that out." It's not quite like that. It's much more of a if it's got a darkness and a darkness to it. Again, massively pretentiously, the model for it is probably Kafka's Metamorphosis, which is very dark, but it's not gritty in the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not gritty in the George R. R. Martin way.
Yeah. Although I think there are some naked people about here. No.
Buy it and find out. When will we see the sequel?
Now. It's coming out. This is coming out in July against George R. R. Martin. Lucky me. And that's the sequel, Fenrir, which is set 100 years later at the Viking siege of Paris, which is something I didn't know existed. See, I didn't know that the Vikings did besiege Paris, but they did, and that's when they ended up being given Normandy. Basically, Rollo was paid off by Charles the Fat, despite the fact that the Frankish Frankish barons were quite confident they could have beaten the Vikings in battle, but Charles the Fat still chose to pay them off.
So we'll soon see the sequel. Thank you very much, and let's hear from